there's there's been a lot of talk I've done lately about different teams, and there's been a lot of talk about Carolina. And with Carolina, the interesting thing is, it's an underachieving team. So I thought about looking at this from a Ron Francis point of view and the GM moves he's made, or looking at Bill Peters and saying, is his job safe? But I think there's more to it than that. Now, on the board here, I've got Scott Darling, Justin Williams, Josh Juris, and Marcus Kruger, who were brought in the offseason. Now, when you look, Scott Darling's numbers aren't great to start the season, and Scott Darling has not been a part of a solution as he was expected to be. Now, it's a lot of pressure to put on Scott Darling, but you got Cam Ward there as the backup. The thing is, while Ward's been better than Darling, his numbers haven't added up either. Williams, there is no problem with Williams. Williams has 9 points in 12 games. Only one of those is goals. Only one of those is a goal. Josh Juris, 8 games, 4 points. Marcus Kruger, I think he has 1 point last time I looked. But Kruger wasn't brought in for his offense. Here's the main thing, though. What is going to add to their offense? And this is where you look at Ron Francis and say, all right, what has Francis done for them? So let's look at his trades. And again, I'm going to do this in a win, a loss, or whatever category. All right. His first trade, he trades out Jay Harrison for a 6th round pick. That's a whatever. Jay Harrison was a fringe NHL player, and he got something back for him, so that's good. Andre Sekera was traded for a conditional 15 or 16 pick. That ended up being a 2016 pick, and it was 21st overall, and it was Julien Gauthier. It's still too early to say whether he wins that one. Roland McEwen came over as well, but Sekera signed as a free agent away from the Kings to the Oilers, so for a rental, that's not bad. I'll give him a win on that one. So see, I already gave Francis a win, so he's 1-0-1 right now. Let's just take a look through the rest of his moves. There's not a lot here. He got a 6th round pick and a 3rd round pick for Yuri Tlusty. And considering that Tlusty is no longer in the NHL, I'll give him a win on that one. Tim Gleason goes to Washington for Jack Hillen and a 4th rounder. That's a whatever. Eddie Lack, acquired from the Canucks for a 3rd round and a 5th round and a 7th round pick. Honestly, the funny thing is, at the time this trade was made, Canuck fans lose their minds. Everybody says, what a great move by Francis. Eddie Lack as a backup, results were middling. So 2 draft picks for Lack. I'll give that a whatever, kind of a tie. Trades Hudobin to the Ducks for Wisniewski. Sort of the same thing. Wisniewski never really caught on with Carolina, but Hudobin ends up being demoted by the Ducks. So, you can look now and go, well, he's good for Boston. Yeah, but the Ducks didn't like him either. So, that's another one that I'll give a draw to. He acquires Christopher Stieg, Joachim Nordstrom, and a 3rd rounder for Dennis Robertson, Jake Massey, and a 5th round pick in 2017. Well, again, none of those parts became anything important to this stage. Then he trades Christopher Stieg to the Kings for Valentin Zykov and a conditional 5th round pick. Zykov hasn't become an NHL regular yet. And there's some debate about whether or not he ever will. And of course, for Stieg didn't end up staying with the Kings. He ended up going over to, he's in Calgary now. And of course, Edmonton wanted him and everything else. So, yeah, it's just another one of those whatever trades. Eric Stahl. So this was his chance to really hit it out of the park. Eric Stahl gets traded. He gets 2 second rounders back and Sorella. Did he get enough back? You know what? Trading out Stahl was a loss. And it was a loss because Carolina didn't get anything back down the middle. Carolina still doesn't have that star power down the middle that they need. When you look at most successful teams in the NHL, they're built by depth down the middle. They're built on the blue line. And that's something I'm going to come back to. But losing Stahl for what he got back, I don't care if it's rental situation. I don't care if it's a he doesn't want to be here situation like a Matt Duchene. You've got to get something back that's going to help your roster now or soon. Because this team hasn't made the playoffs since 2009. So that's almost a decade. John Michael Lyles acquired by the Bruins for Anthony Kamara, a third rounder and a fifth rounder. Again, Lyles was kind of iffy, but it's still a loss for me with Carolina because Lyles was still a half-decent defenseman for the Bruins for a season and a bit, and he didn't get anything back that played for them. He gets Dennis Robertson from the Blackhawks for Drew McIntyre. That's a whatever. He gets Dane Fox from the Canucks for future considerations. That's a whatever because Dane Fox never going to play in the NHL. He trades Brody Sutter for Connor Brickley. This would have been a win if he'd kept Brickley. Brickley goes out in the expansion draft to Vegas, and now I believe he's back in Florida, right? Yeah, he's back in Florida, and he's playing well, so that's a whatever as well. Because he wasn't able to keep Brickley, who's actually looking like he might actually be an NHLer. Keegan Lowe was acquired by Montreal for Philip Samuelson, and again, so he's making moves. Ron Francis is making moves, but are they improving the team? Well, here's one that'll tell you. Ron Hainsey gets acquired by the Penguins for Danny Cristo and a second-round pick in 2017, which I believe is Luke Martin. I believe Luke Martin would have been that draft pick. Who knows? It's still out there, but you know, Hainsey helps his team get to a Stanley Cup in Pittsburgh, so... Victor Stahlberg was acquired by the Ottawa Senators for a third-round pick this year. And again, I don't see a name there of a guy who's playing in the NHL, so we don't know yet what's going to happen with that one. Scott Darling acquired for a third-round pick. Yeah. Again, has Darling solidified their goaltending? No. So this is the problem. I can't... You know, the Vegas Golden Knights get a fifth-round pick from Carolina for expansion draft considerations. Trevor Van Riemsdyk and a seventh-rounder are acquired by Carolina for a second-round pick in 2017. A second-round pick for Trevor Van Riemsdyk. Is Trevor Van Riemsdyk worth a second-round draft pick? That's a question that you may want to ask yourself here, because Vegas gets a fifth and a second from Carolina, and is Carolina better as a team right now? See, I talked this up over the summer, and I was really excited about what I thought Carolina might be able to do with this new roster. Keegan Kanzig and a sixth-rounder for Eddie Lack, Ryan Murphy, and a seventh-rounder. Well, of course, Murphy gets bought out. Lack is still there in Calgary. Is he putting up better numbers than Darling? No, but he gave up draft picks and parts to go from Lack to Darling, and it hasn't translated to better numbers with Darling so far. It's still early in the year. Remember, it's only 12 games in. Kruger for a fifth-round pick. Again, I don't know how this isn't as easy to rate. You know, when I was rating, whether I'm rating Chiarelli or I'm rating Snow or whatever I'm rating, it is really hard to rate trade wins and losses. So then you ask yourself, okay, so coming out of last season, when they had 87 points, what was the move made by Ron Francis to make the team better? Because remember now, and I'm going to look at last year's stats for this, that they came out with a really hot second half. Cam Ward ended up with a 905 save percentage. Eddie Lack ended up with a 902. Now, Darling has a 903. Lack had a really good second half to get to that 902. He had a really horrendous first half of the season last year we don't want to talk about. Now, Darling, before he came over from Chicago, he put up a 924 last year. He was 18-5-5 in Chicago. Crawford had a 918 save percentage. Now, that's where you look at those stats and you go, but what about strength of competition? Was Darling playing against teams that were lower in the standings? Probably. That's usually the way backups work. A lot of the time, a backup will put up better numbers than the starter due to the fact that they're playing weaker competition. So as fans, when we look at the numbers, we'll go, you know, the backup's playing so much better than the starter. But he's really not. He's just not getting those challenges. So maybe the starter's getting that game against Chicago, and then the backup's getting that game against Arizona. So, yeah, the numbers will show, oh, hey, he played so much better. But really, that wasn't the case. So, Carolina, what has been done to improve the team so far? What has really changed to improve the team? So let's take a look at where the team was and where the team is. So when he took over, this is what he was looking at. So what I use for that is this wonderful magazine, the Pooler's Guide, which has all of the stats of the team the year before he took over. So he took over in April of that year, and this is basically the stats of the roster he got. A nice sharp jersey too. So he had Stahl with 61 points, Skinner, Sekera. Oh, that's a defenseman. I should have put a D next here. There's a point I'm trying to make here. So Sekera, 44 points on defense. Falk, 32 points on defense. Semin, 20 goal scorer. Skinner, 30 goal scorer. Stahl, 20 goal scorer. Jordan Stahl just brought in 15 goals. Falk, Gerby, Toulouse, Nash, and Dwyer. In net, Hudobin had a 19-14-1 record, 2.30 goals against, and 926 save percentage. This is part of the reason why when I talk about my Bruins, I say, well, Hudobin's in net, it's fine, because he can be a very good goaltender. Ward had a rough year, 10-12-6, 3.06 goals against, 898 save percentage. Justin Peters, wipe part of that off, ignore that, 7-9-4, 2.50 goals against, and 919 save percentage. Remember what I said about backups probably playing weaker opposition? That kind of happened with Justin Peters here, so you can't read a whole lot into that. Now here's where we are early this season. So remember, he's had years. He's had 3 years to change out the roster. Here's Skinner leading the way with 7 goals in 12 games. Williams just brought back 9 points in 12 games. Here's Jordan Stahl with 7. Lindholm 7. Aho 7. Teravainen 7. McGinn 5. Here's your highest scoring defenseman right now, Noah Hanifin at 5. So he's on pace right now for about 35 points maybe, which would be below the 44 put up by Sekera. Well below what you need in terms of an offensive defenseman. Almost every team has a guy who can put up about 50 points on the blue line. For some reason, nobody in that blue line right now is showing signs of it. Rask, 5 points. Juris, 4 points in 8 games. And then Ryan with 4 points in 12 games. In net, Darling, 3-3-3, 2.50 goals against, 903 save percentage. Ward, 3-1-2, 339 goals against, and 911 save percentage. Meaning, Ward's been fed to the wolves a little more than Darling. Darling's had fewer shots, and he's allowed more of them to go by. So, in terms of goalies right now, Ward has outperformed Darling. In terms of forwards, I would argue that this group is better than this group. When you look at the way that this team ended up, they ended up with, 13-14, the year that he took over, they had 93 points. So they had 93 points the year that Ron Francis takes over. They're on pace for about 75, and their highest total was from last year, which was 87, I believe we went over. So where does it end then? Does this mean that Francis has done a poor job bringing in players, or is this a matter of Peters isn't getting what he needs to get out of that roster? There's a really good defense here, but it's a young defense. And Hanifin being the leader on the blue line is indicative of that. Falk has really not shown that offensive acumen yet this year. Let me just go through the skaters again. So he is the highest rated defenseman at 5 points in 12 games. The next highest rated defenseman for scoring is Slavin with 3 points. Falk also has 3 points. Hayden Fleury has 3 points as a rookie. Pesce has 1 point. Van Riemsdyk has 1 point. So there's no offense coming from that blue line whatsoever. And so when you look at a defense that's not producing anything, either the GM hasn't provided the right personnel to get that defense to start producing and supporting its forwards, or the coach hasn't been able to get it out of them. The funny thing is, for me, when I look at Carolina and I look at where they're at, and really, honestly, I did think they'd be a playoff team this year. I don't understand. I mean, it's a very young team, and I really like their defense. I like Hanifin. I like Pesce. I like Slavin. The thing is, they gave Slavin and Pesce these big, huge extensions based almost entirely on one good season. So while there's a lot of heat being thrown on Chiarelli for giving Draisaitl this huge long-term extension, don't look away from Carolina with that either. There's some long-term extensions being given to guys for big money who haven't really shown anything yet. They haven't shown that they can be even in the conversation for a Norris Trophy, much less that they could win one. And you know, I like Falk, but he's not, for me anyways, he's not a premier top-notch defenseman. I think where Carolina's got it is they've got a lot of really good players, but outside of Jeff Skinner, there's nobody you look at and say, there's a sniper. And even including Jeff Skinner, there isn't anybody you look at on the team and say, okay, this is a guy who can bring that roster and bring that team to the next level. I fully admit, I got this wrong. I absolutely got this wrong. That I felt Carolina was going to move ahead, and I guess I was looking at the fact that they had good depth for NHL players, and I wasn't seeing, hey, they don't have the premier talent to get to that next level. I was sort of caught up in how well they played down the stretch last year, and that they got into the conversation after being so far out of the conversation after October. But the fact is, they still missed the playoffs, and it looks like they'll miss them again. This is not indicative of a team that's going anywhere. In fact, when I look at these, yeah, no, I got that wrong. Let me fix that. Just I'm looking at it, I'm like, that's not their record. That's not their record. Somebody's yelling at their computer right now. So it's 3-3-3, and Ward's 1-2-0. Oh, there we go. There we go. Fixed it. Got it. Because I'm looking at it, I'm like, wait, that's above 500. That's not right. So, again, do they play Ward more? Well, look, Ward's been putting up iffy stats for years. This is why when a team keeps somebody who's not performing up to what you need to be a playoff team or to be a contender, I look at that and I go, wait, why did they resign him? For what reason? Why? And in terms of drafting, I would say the jury's still out on Francis. And let's just take a quick look at that, because, again, due to the fact that he hasn't been in Carolina as a GM for very long, we can only look at the last 4 drafts. And I don't want to focus on the last 2 because it's too early to say if he missed out on something. So you look and you see Hayden Fleury, who's now in the NHL, Nedeljkovic in net. He is supposed to be a starter at some point, but that's years out. Fogle, Wesley, Walmart's played in the NHL already. Bishop, Jenkins. 2015, Noah Hannafin, who I still think was the steal of that draft. There's a lot of, people say that Mitch Marner, was a better player for the Leafs to pick than Noah Hannafin. I argue, if the Leafs had drafted Noah Hannafin instead of Mitch Marner, that they'd have a better blue line than they have right now. And a lot of the discussions over what Toronto needs to do, we wouldn't be having right now. But again, and I've had that opinion since that draft was done. Sebastian Aho was a steal in the second round. He hasn't shown it yet this year in terms of goals. But I still think Aho is going to improve on his 49 points from last year. He'd better. Callum Booth, who's kind of, the last time I saw any report on him, he'd kind of fallen off the charts. He had been drafted in the 3rd round, but he's kind of fallen off the charts. Nicholas Roy, Luke Stevens, Spencer Smallman, Jake Massey, David Cotton, Stephen Lawrence. Again, none of these really jump out. And then from the last 2 drafts, Nikash could be a steal in this past draft. And Jake Bean is still supposed to be NHL level defenseman, but how many of these defensemen are they going to have? How many good young defensemen are they going to have? So what they're missing a stud on the blue line. And they're missing a star player down the middle. And, that says really what I should have been looking at all along. Is that the weakness they've had at center since they got rid of Eric Stahl has never been addressed. And while it is the most difficult position to fix, there are teams that have been figuring it out. Look at Nashville. Nashville's got themselves a fantastic blue line or a fantastic center spot. Ottawa, they believe that Duchesne was the guy. So they went out and they got Duchesne. Carolina and Ron Francis need to show that killer instinct. They need to go out and they need to get a face of the franchise type player, a guy who can take them to that next level. And I don't know when that happens. I don't know who that happens with. But I'm going to tell you right now, if this continues, if this path continues, I think the coach gets fired before the All-Star game, and the GM could lose his job at the end of the year. Because this team, over numerous seasons, has actually, I would argue, got younger and less capable of winning than they were when Ron Francis took over. And the lack of production comes back on the coach. So while Bill Peters may have been seen as this really solid assistant coach to Mike Babcock at one point in the Detroit organization, the results haven't been there. And I've discussed before how certain coaches are better in some organizations than others. Maybe that's what we're seeing here. Maybe Peters is one of those guys who's a really good assistant, and as a head coach, the results just don't show. So, there you go. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I've tried to be as fair as possible and admit my own faults in saying that Carolina, I felt, would make the playoffs, when this path just shows me that this could be another long season for Carolina fans. And again, and I need to mention this, when people talk about, oh, nobody shows up in Carolina, you should move the team. This is what fans have to look at after 8 years of not making the playoffs. These are the stats that greet them when they look at the sports pages. This is the team that Ron Francis has given them. A hero, a man who scored over 1,700 points in his career and was a hero to Hartford and Carolina both. But he has not been that hero as a GM, and Peters as a coach has not been able to get anything more out of this squad than they got out of this one that finished with 93 points before Jim Rutherford moved on. And I would argue that the team that Rutherford put together has never been equaled by Ron Francis and Peters as coach, and this team missed the playoffs. So when you're not able to reach the level of a team that missed the playoffs with 93 points over a number of seasons, and we're going on 4, it's probably time to look at the GM and the coach. So there you go. There's my opinion on that. Let me know your opinions. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.